have 5 young children, and lives in Golders Green. And I would like to dedicate the shir tonight in memory of Anne Shire's cousin, who unfortunately passed away, I think today or yesterday, Rosa Bas Peretz, and also to my late brother, Arnold Aaron Zeev, Ben Rachel, and his your site is on the 16th of Av. So, Shira, over to you.
Thank you very much.
I didn't say your title of your talk, which is the most important thing. I'm so sorry. She's talking tonight is From Darkness to Light, A Journey Through Time. And Tisha B'Av is around the corner. What more can one say? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all again. If you don't mind, I'm going to mute. I'll mute you all, and then if anyone wants to unmute themselves, if you want to say something, then please feel free. But probably better for interference to keep people muted unless you want to say something in particular. Okay. So Tisha B'Av. So we all know that each year on Tisha B'Av, we're in mourning. And what are we mourning? Well, we're mourning for lots of things, but the main things that we focus on are the destruction of both Batei Mikdash, which both happened on Tisha B'Av. Now, of course, none of us were around to see the Beis Hamikdash, either of them. They were around a very, very long time ago, a few thousand years. So how can we possibly mourn the loss of something that we've never actually had, something that none of us have ever experienced in our lifetime? You know, when someone's really in mourning for somebody that they've lost, you don't need to tell them to fast or not to eat. They can't eat because they feel, you know, they just feel like they can't physically eat. You don't need to tell somebody to sit on the floor if they're in mourning. They can't get off the floor because they're so torn up about their loss. So on Tisha B'Av, we have all these things that we're told to do, that you can't eat, that you have to sit on the floor, that you can't socialize. And we go through the motions of mourning, which come very naturally if you're really in mourning, but we're just pretending, really. We just go through these things and we try to make ourselves feel like we're in mourning, because really, I've never heard anyone say on Tisha B'Av, you know, I just can't bear to eat because I'm so upset about the destruction of the temple. You know, we're not really feeling that emotion. We do often hear people say, you know, I'm really in a lot of pain because I'm very, very hungry. And what are you breaking your fast on? But that's something else. So, you know, we might tap into that emotion. We might watch a Holocaust film in the afternoon to try to trigger some kind of real emotion in us. But how can we begin to relate to it as an actual, real, personal loss? So we need to begin to realize that these stories that we've grown up with, they're real. They happen to real people, to lots of people. It's not just a fairy tale that somebody made up. You know, often the characters in the Torah, because you've heard these stories from when you were really, really little, some of us, you know, maybe in primary school, we grew up with them. We kind of relate to it sometimes as like, you know, the Three Little Pigs or Cinderella. But actually, you know, we think of them as characters in the book, but actually they were actual real people. And it's not something that just happened to them, to our ancestors. We, each and every one of us, hasn't just come into existence now in the 20th or 21st century. We were each one of the 600,000 neshamas who heard Hashem's voice and witnessed Matan Torah. And in the second Rashi of the Torah, he explains that the word Bereshis is a condensed form of two words, of Bishvil Rashis, for the sake of Rashis, Hashem created the world. And Rashi explains that the two things referred to as Rashis, for the sake of Rashis, are the Torah and the Jewish people. So if you think back to that point in our history, when we'd just got the Torah, we'd just become a people, we'd just come out of Egypt, we'd become a nation, we'd received the Torah, and we were on the highest spiritual level. We'd seen open miracles. And Hashem's whole purpose in creating the world had been fulfilled. He had a nation, he had the Jewish people, and he'd given us the Torah. And we were just on the verge of entering Eretz Yisrael, which was like the final stage where, you know, that was really the point of everything that Hashem created us for, to be the Jewish people as one nation, living in Eretz Yisrael, keeping the Torah. And Chazal say that if we hadn't sinned with the Egel and with the Meraglim, if we'd gone straight into Eretz Israel at that point, straight after Matan Torah with Moshe, we would have conquered the land, we would have destroyed all of our enemies, not left some of them behind, and built a Beis Hamikdash that could never have been destroyed, and we'd have been living in Messianic times from then until today. So, we thought we were on this spiritual high. We said Na'aseh V'nishma, and we meant it. We really did mean it. But just 40 days after saying that, suddenly we're worshipping a golden calf. And the first set of luchas were made by Hashem himself. And this set of luchas were miraculous. Each letter in it, each of the Aseres Hadibros was not just engraved onto it, but it penetrated all the way through. Each letter, you could read it from the front or from the back, and it would say the same thing. For example, the letter Samach with the hole in the middle, there would be a little piece of marble that was just floating, suspended in midair, because this was a miraculous set of luchas. And when Moshe comes down from the mountain and he sees that just 40 days later, we're all worshipping a golden calf, he smashes those luchas to pieces because he realizes that that's not really who we are yet. Of the Torah of how to live our lives hasn't penetrated all the way through us. We might be externally Jewish and we might be saying all the right things, Na'aseh V'nishma, and look the part, but it's not really fully internalized yet. So he replaced it with a second set engraved on it. It was all superficial. We've got the Torah written on it, but not penetrating all the way through as it was supposed to. And so our Tisha B'Av story begins. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and they cried, and the people wept that night. Rabbi Yochanan said that night was the night of the 9th of Av. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to them, "You wept needlessly that night, and I will therefore establish for you a true tragedy, over which there'll be weeping in future generations." So this is how Tisha B'Av actually began. On the night that the Meraglim came back with their report, we stayed awake that whole night crying. And Hashem made us a promise on that day. He says, this will be the night that you will always be crying. And it will be my way of reminding you whenever you need it, that you're still not got this message yet, that you're still not Jewish through and through, that the Torah hasn't fully penetrated you, and that Mashiach's still not here, but that I haven't forgotten you. So he sends us this repeated message on the same night. Throughout our history, we're going to see that he sends the same message on the same day, and almost every bad thing that's ever happened to us throughout our history has happened on the same day, because Hashem wanted us to know it's him talking to us. It's not just random. It would be even more painful, all the things that had happened to us, if there was no reason for it, if they were just completely random. And we may not know the reason, but the fact that all of them happened on the same day shows us that it's Hashem sending us this message, that he's still there and that he's still waiting for us. So this year, I want us to really try and internalize that message and to gain a sense of what we as a people have been through and what we're really missing. So before this evening, I interviewed some people to help us to do this. Now, up to you if you want to do this. If you feel comfortable, shut your eyes as they're speaking and try to actually form an image in your mind of what they look like, who they are. Get a picture in your head of who these people are so that you can really connect with them and their story. Okay, so here's our first person's interview.
What's your name?
I'm Yossi.
How old are you, Yossi?
I'm 10.
Can you tell me a bit about your Saba?
I love my Saba. We're really close. He always has the best stories. He always gets this twinkle in his eyes as he tells them. He talks a lot about his childhood. It was very different to mine.
Do you see him a lot?
We always spend Shabbos together. I love listening to his Zemiras, and he loves talking about Torah with me at the table. Every week since I turned 9, I'd go to his house on a Thursday and we'd learn together. It's my favourite hour of the week, and I think it's his too.
And what happened last week?
I went to Sab as usual. I was all excited to tell him what ideas I had planned for his birthday. He was turning 60 next week. With tears rolling down his cheeks, he took me on his knee like he used to when I was little and held me so tight I could barely breathe. He said to me, "Yossi, I'm so sorry. This is going to be our last Thursday together. Please always remember me and remember the Torah I taught you. You're going to need it for when you're a Saba. I love you, Yossi." And that was the last time I saw him. That night it was Tisha B'Av 2487.
As it was taught in a brisa, all 40 years that they were in the desert, every Erev Tisha B'Av, the proclaimer would go out and say, "Let each individual go out and dig his grave," and every single person would go out and dig for themselves a grave and sleep in it, in case they would die before they had dug. And the next day, the proclaimer would go out and proclaim, "Let the living separate themselves from the dead," and everyone who had the soul of life would rise and go out of his grave. And every year they would do this. This was a generation of the Jews in the desert. So in the Midbar, every man between 20 and 60 were destined to die before they entered Eretz Yisrael as a punishment for the Chet HaMeraglim. And Hashem didn't want the punishment to be too harsh and for them to die prematurely. So each of them died the year that they turned 60. And on which day of the year did they die? They all died on Tisha B'Av. Each man would go out and dig his grave himself on Erev Tisha B'Av and lie down in it. And by the morning, anyone turning 60 that year would be dead. Can you imagine how sobering that is? How focused they must have been because they knew exactly how long they had left. Imagine all those little children like Yossi who lost an entire generation of Sabas, all those missed moments and missed opportunities together. Those Sabas who'd all been born in slavery and they'd told their grandchildren how much they'd looked forward to freedom and to living in Eretz Yisrael, but they never actually made it. We had a terrible 40-year-long punishment. But then we came out of the darkness and back into the light, and we finally entered Eretz Yisrael. So this is, well, obviously we don't have a real picture of King Shlomo's temple, but it looked something a bit like this. The generation of the first Beis Hamikdash, they also could have been the ones to make it, to bring Mashiach. Imagine having a king with the depth and the passion that King David displays in Tehillim, or a king with the wisdom of King Shlomo, that anytime you have a problem that you can't solve, you just go to him to guide you. And finally, we're settled, we've built a Beis Hamikdash, and it was so stunning that people traveled from all over the world to come and see it. Even the Queen of Sheba came to see it. So what was holding us back? It was like a shul where every Jew alive was a member, a place where everyone belonged. There was no sense of walking into shul and thinking, well, is anyone going to say good Shabbos to me? We all just belonged. You could pop in and visit Hashem at his house whenever you fancied. And you knew where you'd be for every Yom Tov because the whole of the Jewish people were your extended family, and you always spent Yom Tov together with your family. It must have been such an incredible existence, such a sense of belonging that we were all, united with a common purpose in the same place at the same time. But yet this message still didn't fully penetrate, and we didn't appreciate how good life was. Okay, so now we're going to shut our eyes again, if you want to, and listen to our next guest.
What's your name?
My name is Ellie Sheva, but my family all call me Chevy.
And how old are you, Chevy?
I'm 12.
Would you tell me about your family?
I'm the oldest. I have 3 younger siblings, 2 little sisters and a baby brother. He's called Moshe and I love looking after him. He's my favourite because he's so cute.
Sounds like a busy home. You must be a big help.
I am. I always help Mummy get ready for Shabbos. My favourite job is to cut up the vegetables for the chicken soup. My Mummy makes the best chicken soup. I'll try. My Mummy had sent me around to check on my safety because she hasn't been well. Lots of people aren't well. There's not much food at the moment. My Moshe's always crying because he's hungry. Mummy had saved some of our bread for safety because she was worried about her. I gave her the food and stayed a while, then I came home.
And what happened when you got home?
At first I was chicken soup, and we haven't had it in weeks. I saw Mummy standing with her big pot and staring at it. It was quiet at home. I couldn't hear Moshi crying. Mummy, I said, you've made chicken soup, but where's Moshi? She couldn't answer. She just fell on the floor and screamed. I never had a sound like it. Then she was rocking herself on the floor and sobbing. And then I knew.
What day did this happen?
It was the 8th of 3-3.
So this is from a quote from Eicha. Yedei noshim rachmanios bishlu yaldehen hayu levaros lamo bes ami. With their own hands, tender-hearted women have cooked their children. Such became their food in the disaster of my poor people. The first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed on Tisha B'Av 3338. We served Avodah Zarah, we were killing each other, we were immoral. So Hashem had to send us another reminder. So on Tisha B'Av 3338, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed our temple, burned it to the ground, and sent us into exile. We were dying of starvation on the streets, and as Yirmiyahu described so graphically in Eicha, we'd sunk to unimaginable depths. Can you imagine, as a mother, especially a Jewish mother, the pain of not being able to feed your children, to have to watch them die of starvation as they're crying for you? And then to sink to the level of actually being so hungry that you could cook your own child, who you've carried inside you, who you've nursed, who you've cuddled. It's too horrific to even imagine. And then to go into exile as a broken family, completely decimated, not knowing what the future holds. And yet we made it back again. We had a 70-year exile where we had to contend with Haman. But again, Hashem brings us back into the light and offers us another chance. Like we always do, we managed to rebuild ourselves. We rebuilt the Beis Hamikdash, but this message still hadn't sunk in. And this time, sinas chinam, hatred for no reason, caused Hashem to send the Romans. 420 years after it was built, the second temple was destroyed. And of course, what day does Hashem send us his reminder? Tisha B'Av 3830. And Josephus describes it. As the flames caught, a fearful cry welled up from the Jews who rushed to the rescue, caring nothing for their lives. Around the altar were heaps of corpses, while streams of blood flowed down the steps of the sanctuary. While the temple was in flames, everything they could lay their hands on, and slaughtered all who were caught. No pity was shown to age or rank, old men or children, all were massacred. As the flames roared up, and since the temple stood on a hill, it seemed as if the whole city were ablaze. The noise was deafening, with war cries of the legions, howls of the rebels, surrounded by fire and sword, and the shrieks of the people. The ground was hidden by corpses, and soldiers had to climb over heaps of bodies in pursuit of the fugitives. This time when we go into exile, we spread out all over, and then we've never all been back together again since then. Next comes the Crusades, Tisha B'Av 4855. The first crusade was declared by Pope Urban II. It was an armed pilgrimage to Jerusalem to recover it from Islamic rule, as well as a mission to convert everyone to Christianity. 10,000 Jews were killed in the first month of the crusade. The Crusades brought death and destruction to thousands of Jews and totally obliterated many communities in the Rhineland and France. The Crusades lasted for 2 centuries. And then it carried on. We spread out throughout Europe. And in almost every country we've ever lived, we've been expelled. The Jews were expelled from England on July the 18th, 1290, Tisha B'Av 5050. The Jews were expelled from France on July the 22nd, 1306, just the day after Tisha B'Av 5066. And the Jews were expelled from Spain on July the 31st, 1492, just 2 days before Tisha B'Av 5252. So now we're going to hear from our next.
Sarah, how old are you?
I'm 7.
Where do you live?
In Italy, but I used to live in Spain.
Why did you move?
My nana was a very important man, had a lot of money and was an advisor to the king and queen. One day he came rushing back from the palace and told my parents some terrible news. I was listening outside the door, but they didn't see me. The king and queen said that we weren't allowed to be Jewish anymore, that we can't keep Shabbos or learn Torah, that we have to convert or leave Spain. He told my parents he begged them to change their mind, even offered them 13,000 coins, but they wouldn't listen to him. That night my mummy came into my room and told me that we have to only be Jewish in secret now, so that only Hashem will know we're still Jewish in our hearts. She whispered me the Shema as I fell asleep, and I heard her that night packing up our things into a small bag which she hid. There were lots of whispering in the next few months, and finally it was time to go. I had to leave my house and my friends, and I cried the whole way as we walked to the port.
When did you get there, Sarah?
It was Tisha B'Av 1492.
Sarah's nana, who she's talking about, was the Abarbanel. After almost a millennium of harmonious existence in Spain, the Jewish community, which had been really powerful and really prosperous in Europe, completely ceased to exist. The Abarbanel was born in Lisbon in Portugal in 1437, and he was incredibly gifted, both in terms of his Torah knowledge. He's written loads and loads of commentaries, but as well as this, he was a master of financial matters. And he was first employed by the King of Portugal, and then he was forced to leave there and he moved to Toledo in Spain. And that's where he did a lot of his writing for his commentaries. And then he became an advisor to the Catholic monarchs, to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. They issued a decree in March of 1492, which gave the choice between expulsion and conversion. And he tried his best to change their minds. He begged for the Jews to be allowed to stay. And he even offered, he was a very wealthy man, he even offered 30,000 gold coins to them, and they still refused. And they even offered him the chance to stay. They said, if you want to stay, then you can stay because you're valuable to us. And he said, no, if my people are going, then I'm going to go. So he and around 200,000 fellow Jews left the country, and he eventually moved and resettled in Venice, where he died in 1508. And of course, which day did they leave Spain? They left by ship on Tisha B'Av of 1492. Now, my generation, we've never had to do this, to leave everything behind, to leave everyone you love, everything that you're used to, your home, your belongings, and to start all over again. And those Jews who left, those were the lucky ones, the ones who weren't tortured or killed. And of course, we all know about the Marranos who pretended to convert and actually kept their Judaism in secret. And I found out recently, there's a small Jewish community in a place called Belmonte in Portugal who are descended from Marranos. And only recently, in the last century, they've started again openly practicing Judaism, and they have their own shul, they light Shabbos candles, and what they're keeping is very, very similar to what we're keeping. And think how long ago this was. It was 500 years ago. They've been doing it in secret, generation after generation, and only recently have started really keeping it in public. It's really, really incredible what they had to contend with. Okay, so this is the account of their leaving Spain. Historian Charles Alperin, based on testimonies from the period, described the last days of the expulsion. All roads leading to the ports and the borders were packed with masses of people, old and young, healthy and handicapped, men and women, most of them by foot, some fortunate enough to sit on mules or horses or to ride a wagon. Until the very last moment, priests tried to convince the Jews to convert, and the rabbis were trying to encourage the weary and the desperate. Long rows of women and children were singing and drumming, attempting to cheer the crowd. When they finally reached the seashore, they wept and prayed in vain for a miracle. From the moment they boarded the ships, they were looted, murdered, sold to pirates, abandoned on the beach, and refused entry by many, many countries. And now we come on to our more recent history. Tisha of 1914 was the day that Germany declared war on Russia and marked the beginning of World War I. And we don't often think of World War I as a particularly Jewish event, but actually 60,000 British Jews served in the armed forces and 3,500 were killed. 100,000 German Jews fought in the Great War, of whom 12,000 were killed. And in Russia, a reputed 250,000 Jews fought for the Tsar, who they all hated. Jews died at Ypres and on the Somme, fighting on opposite sides of the battlefront. Apart from the tens of thousands of Jewish soldiers who lost their lives on both sides, over 1 million altogether, entire regions of Eastern Europe were uprooted and ordinary civilian life was just not possible due to the upheaval of war. So the Jewish communities were actually, some of them were destroyed. Many historians view World War I as one of the major causes of Hitler's rise to power and the beginning of World War II. So during World War II, on July the 31st, 1941, on the evening of the 8th of Av, Hermann Goering signed the document to implement the final solution of the Jewish problem, i.e. extermination. The following year, the cattle cars left Warsaw, the largest ghetto, to take all the Jews to Treblinka on Tisha B'Av of 1942. Hillel Seidman wrote a diary where he describes being caught with thousands of other Jews and funneled by armed guard to the Umschlagplatz, the waiting area to the train station. There, cattle cars, freight wagons, normally used for transporting animals, are waiting to deport them to their death.
I walk out into the street, as does everybody else, thirsting for news, only to discover that from this morning, the ghetto has been surrounded by Ukrainian militia. These include some Latvians and Lithuanians, angels of destruction of every type. Anyone approaching the walls is shot on the spot. We are ensnared in a trap. And so we march, old and young, women and children, rich and poor, in lines of 8 abreast according to the German system, in our many thousands, and the crowd stretches back as far as the eye can see. Everybody presses tightly together, so united in suffering, so totally an Am Echad. Never before have I sensed so palpably the strands which bind us Jews together, our common cause and our united purpose, like I do today on the death march. I managed to escape deportation, but thousands of men, women and children did not. As night falls, I finally reach home, my brain bursting with terrifying images. Crossing our courtyard, I notice our small shtibel. About 20 men sit on upturned benches. It's Tisha B'Av tonight. 2 flickering candles at the temporary prayer stand dimly light up the bent heads, with their eyes staring far into the distance. As that heart-rending tune wells up, Eicho Yoshvo Vodod Hoir Rabosiom. The tune that was perhaps first composed at the exile from Jerusalem and has since absorbed the tears of generations.
As I said at the beginning, it's hard to fully appreciate the loss of something that we've never had. But as we travel back through the generations, if we really try to immerse ourselves in their lives and imagine what they went through, to connect to them as real people, not just fairy tales that we've grown up with, we began to feel their pain and to experience their loss as our loss, their suffering as our suffering. In every generation that the Beis Hamikdash isn't rebuilt, it's as if we've destroyed it. And it's not random that each one of us exists. Think how many people died in each of these events that we've spoken about tonight. It's millions and millions of Jews throughout the centuries. How many times could one of your ancestors have been killed, which would have ensured that you yourself wouldn't exist? And yet, here we all are. Do you know what the odds are of every terrible thing that's ever happened to us as a nation happening on the same calendar date, the exact date Hashem told us it would happen on? You'd be more likely to win the national lottery every week for a whole year using the same set of numbers. It's statistically impossible. So if Hashem can decide what happens in the world, and he can decide when it happens, he can also decide who is in the world. So the fact that we're here, Hashem clearly wants each and every one of us to be here, and he wants us to be here now at this time in this generation. This isn't just a bunch of stories that we've grown up with and got used to. Hashem really is trying to bring the world back to the point of perfection he created it for, the Jewish people keeping the Torah in Eretz Yisrael. So Hashem, as promised, sends us reminder after reminder on the exact date that he said he would, to bring us back to that point. You couldn't ask for a clearer message. It's the same as him doing the 10 plagues or splitting the sea for us. It's very clearly an open miracle that it always happens on the same date. He's telling us again and again, however many times you mess up, I'm still here, I'm still waiting for you. I'm still waiting for you to wake up, to hear my message, and to come back to me, to come home with all your brothers and sisters. I'm waiting with open arms. So each time we've come out of the darkness and into the light, we came out of the Midbar and into Eretz Yisrael and built the Beis Hamikdash. We made it back from Bavel and we rebuilt the Beis Hamikdash again. From the darkness and into the light. Imagine who on this cattle truck leaving for Treblinka could ever have imagined. Imagine whispering into the ears of one of those old men on their way to Treblinka or Auschwitz that just a few years later, their son, or now their grandson, great-grandson even, is going to be standing at the Kotel on Tisha B'Av, that we have our own homeland, a place where each and every Jew can call home. They'd never have believed you. It's incredible. I mean, it's unbelievable that that's happened, and yet it is a reality. And what about now? We're not living through an Inquisition or a Holocaust. We're free to live as Jews. We're so incredibly lucky. Each time Hashem brought us back into the light, he thinks to himself, surely this is it. These are the ones that are going to get it. They're going to understand my message. And in our generation, there's nothing holding us back. Look at this quote from Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. If I had the power, I would provision it. He wrote this in the 1800s, bear that in mind. It's really incredible. If I had the power, I would provisionally close all synagogues for 100 years. Do not tremble at the thought of it, Jewish heart. What would happen? Jews and Jewesses without synagogues, desiring to remain such, meaning desiring to remain Jewish, would be forced to concentrate on a Jewish life and a Jewish home. The Jewish officials connected with the synagogue would have to look to the only opportunity now open to them, to teach young and old how to live a Jewish life and how to build a Jewish home. All synagogues closed by Jewish hands would constitute the strongest protest against the abandonment of the Torah in home and life. He's writing this in the 1800s, and at the time it must have sounded like such a crazy notion. Why would you want to close all the shuls? That is a crazy idea. Why would you want to do that? And yet, over the last couple of years, we've actually seen that what he's saying makes a lot of sense. Maybe, as Hashem was missing us so much, he realized that our lives were too busy to be missing him. So he shut the skies, he cancelled all our very important business trips and holidays, and we eventually realized that they actually weren't so important after all. We could manage very well from our living rooms, and our smart business attire went out the window too. You know, you can still conduct your business even without jetting all over the world. And the things that we thought were important actually became really meaningless, and that we'd spent so much of our time on. And the things that we took for granted took on a whole new meaning. Being allowed to leave your own house, being allowed to spend time with friends or with family that don't live in your own home, spending Yom Tov with them. But those are things that, of course, we enjoyed them and we appreciated them, but it's taken on a whole new level now. Now that we have had the opportunity to miss that and we have it back again now, it feels completely different. When the shuls were closed, as Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch suggested, we had time to reflect on our own personal connection to Judaism. And we realized that shul is not just a place that we go and daven. Each of our shuls became a community where we reached out to each other, where we came up with innovative ideas of how to still connect, even if we weren't in the same building. And we prioritized, we were forced to spend time with our immediate families. You know, some of us with little kids, our kids are out all day, and suddenly they were home all day with us. And we were telling them, we were spending time with them, having a good time together, spending quality time together, and talking about what's really important to us, telling them our family values. And really, the focus of our Judaism became our home. It wasn't the shul. And actually, I gave this talk last year, and somebody got in touch with me afterwards to say that actually there's a source that says that pre-Moshiach, there's going to be a period that all of the shuls have to close, because actually the shuls are, instead of the Beis Hamikdash, when we didn't have a Beis Hamikdash, so we had to, the Mikdash, it's called a Mikdash Ma'at. The shul became the Mikdash Ma'at, a little Mikdash, but you can't have both. So maybe when all the shuls are closing, it's time for the real Beis Hamikdash to come back. And remember how we started off this evening, that the whole point of creation was to give us the Torah. Hashem designed the world, he designed us, and he designed our lives. You know, he put everyone into your life, all of your experiences that you've been through, that was all Hashem. And he also gave us an instruction book on how to make the most out of it. And we're not living the life he designed for us, the life that would give us the most pleasure, because we all think, you know, we're happy enough, we're connected enough, but he wants more. When Mashiach comes, Tisha B'Av will become a Yom Tov. The joy and the rejoicing that we'll experience, it will be proportionate to all the suffering that we've been through over the years. You know, all the things that we've remembered every Tisha B'Av, now that it will no longer exist, we'll have the Beis Hamikdash back. It will be a massive cause for celebration. And we're so close. Hashem's just waiting for us to fully internalize that message, to be like the first luchos, where we're fully Jewish through and through, where our Judaism completely penetrates us. It's not just superficial, it's not just external, it's really who we are. And we don't just walk the walk or talk the talk. Our Judaism should really mean something to us. It should fire us up. It should be the thing that we're living for, the thing that gets us up in the morning, and everything that our parents or grandparents died for, that should be what we're living for. And hopefully, if we can do that, Hashem can stop sending us these Tisha B'Av messages, and he'll be ready to bring us out of the darkness and into the light once again and welcome us all home. And please God, when the third temple comes, we'll all be back together again at the Beis Hamikdash for every one of the Shalosh Regalim, and all of the people that we've lost over the years will all be there. There'll be Techiyas HaMesim, and it'll be the whole of the Jewish people throughout history, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, all of the Imahos, everyone that you read about in the Torah, and the whole way through the Tanakh, David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech, and within our own family, our whole lineage all the way back, we'll all be there together. So please God, this will be the last Tisha B'Av, or who knows, there's a few days, maybe we won't even make it to this Tisha B'Av and it will already be a Yom Tov. So thank you all very much for listening. If any of you have any questions, then please feel free to unmute now and we can discuss.
Thank you very much, Shira. That was very moving. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourselves and ask away.
I have a comment. This is Shari here. First of all, thank you, Shira. That was absolutely wonderful, most moving, wonderful, Shira, really, really terrific. I just wanted to mention something. You mentioned Belmonte, and Manfred and I have visited Belmonte. We were there a few years ago, and we spent an evening together with them, and then the next day again we spent with them, and we danced together, and we ate together, and we sang together. It was the most wonderful experience, the high spot of our trip.
So what are they like? Are they keeping everything that we're keeping? I've just read about it, I haven't experienced it first.
Yes, they keep anything. And I want to tell you something very interesting. The authorities were very suspicious about them. So in order to allay their suspicions, what they did was they made the women to be the teachers. And it was the women who throughout the generations were the ones who led the community. And now it's quite hard for them, because now that they've opened up and they have connections with Israel, now the men want to go back to the old system where they're in charge. The women are not quite so happy with that. So I don't know how they're sorting that out. But yes, they were lovely. They were so welcoming and they were so happy. We were a group and they welcomed us so warmly. They were so excited that we had come to visit them. It was a wonderful experience, really wonderful. Yeah.
Amazing, thanks for sharing. That's really interesting.
Yes.
Rivka, I can't hear you. Do you want to unmute?
I went with the Hendon Dust tour and we went to Belmonte, And it was explained to us that it was only in the 1900s that there was a German scientist that was over there, and he heard some sort of rumor that there were hidden Jews there. And eventually he found somebody who sort of confessed, yes, we are. And he said, well, why are you still hiding? And they said, well, because of the Inquisition. They had no idea that it had stopped. And they were still carrying on traditionally in hiding and keeping everything they could remember. And they only married within themselves. Their family trees were sort of a twine. And there's an incredible book called My 15 Grandmothers about one of the conversos who actually converted, and then she had some reason to think that maybe she hadn't needed to convert, and she traced her roots back, and in Israel the Beis Din actually said, we accept you.
Jewish. Wow.
But you know, she had already had a full conversion in America, but she just had this feeling that she was already Jewish, and she was.
It's amazing. It's really incredible.
It's quite incredible. But they kept that faith for 1,300 years, something like that.
500. Yeah.
Sorry, 500
Very
years.
long time. I mean, it's lots of generations to just hand down. I mean, it's literally how we used to have, you know, the oral law, the Torah Shabbat Peh, and it seems incredible that we pass it down, but you can see that actually works.
Yes.
Up to a point.
I just want to say one thing. My birthday won't be the same anymore. It's July the 31st. And you've told us that twice it was Tisha B'Av. I don't think it's ever actually happened to me recently, but that's quite a daunting thought that all those years ago such important events took place, especially the expulsion from Spain. And I remember Aubrey and I went there in the 1980s when it wasn't the place to go. And we went to Cordova. And we've discovered, first of all, we saw the statue of the Rambam, which was very special. But we also went into the shul, which had been converted into a church. But what was amazing, for those of you who haven't been there, I'm sure lots of you have now, all around the edge on the top of the wall of the shul, there was the names of all the famous Rabbonim of the time. And it was just incredible to read those words. And you could see where the women had sat because they had sort of had like a raised height, and then they turned it into a church, and in the middle of this there was a great big cross. But it's what you've said was absolutely incredible, very interesting. If nobody else has got any questions, can I ask Pat to, on behalf of everybody, propose an official vote of thanks?
Thank you very much, Reva. Whoops. Shira, thank you so much for your fascinating and interesting talk through the time, through history. The recordings I found really sobering and so interesting as well. And as you've shown, as you've pointed out, at Tisha B'Av, we will rebuild ourselves as Jews have done, unfortunately, so often before in our history. And as you also mentioned, current days, you know, the last 16 months have been hard in different ways, but have been positives as well. And we have hope and things will get better. And Reva organising the Rosh Chodesh group is a light, being together, thinking and learning together. So thank you very much for helping us on our way tonight.
I said to Reva last time, I always really enjoy speaking to your group because it's such a nice special group of ladies that you have, and you've always got so many interesting things to add. So I really enjoyed it as well. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll see you in the future.
May I just say something? I have never before heard a shir that has moved me this much.
Oh, that's so special.
When I was growing up, you're right, all these things were not were explained to us, but they didn't make the speakers never made it live. You have made it live. So this Tisha B'Av, it really will be, I feel that this Tisha B'Av will have much more meaning for me than any other Tisha B'Av has had in the past, because I find Tisha B'Av a very difficult day to connect with. It is, and always has been, a difficult day to connect with. You know you're supposed to be mourning, but you don't really understand what you're mourning for. But you have made it so plain and so clear and so moving that you have changed my view of Tisha B'Av forever. So thank you very much.
I've got to tell you, Francis, like you, I've always found it a really hard day to connect to, and most of the day I'm just thinking I'm really hungry and I've got a headache. And because I gave this talk for the first time last year to a different shul, to Teras Chaim, and because I'd put in all this preparation, I sat down to Tisha B'Av that year. I gave the talk just before we heard Eicha, and I sat down to hear Eicha, and it was during lockdown, so I was hearing it at home with just my husband. We're sitting on the floor. He thought I was a crazy person. I was just sobbing my way the whole way through Eicha. And like, he's like, I know it's sad, but like, why are you crying so much? And I think I'd really connected to it in a different way, because when you think of the actual people who went through these events, it's not just a story. Imagine that, that little kid Sarah who had to leave her home, or that little boy Yossi in the Midbar thousands of years ago. I never thought about it in that way, that all of that generation, they went in, it was only the old women from Egypt that went in. They missed a whole generation of men, of the grandfathers, who thought, they were desperate to go in, and then they messed it up in the last minute. I think particularly for me, the recordings were all my own kids, so that made it a bit more poignant for me. And also the recording of the old man on his way to Treblinka was my father. I mean, it obviously wasn't really my father, because thank God he is alive and well. But I think hearing it in his voice and, putting that perspective on it for me, like every time I listened to it, I was just like, oh.
The thing that was most moving to me was when you talked about the World War. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was a soldier in the German army and was killed in World War I.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I don't know where he's buried. I've been trying to find out where, if ever, if there was anything to bury, where is he lying? I have no idea. So it made a connection with me. So thank you very much. It was a very enlightening share.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight. I wish everybody an easy fast if you're able to fast on Sunday. And I have no doubt at all that this year will be very, very special to all of us after that wonderful share. That's all I can say. Thank you very much, Shira.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Fast well.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Reva.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining us. I'm pleased your first time was so
moving. Yes,
very
it
moving.
was.
Very, very
moving indeed.
Well, please God.
So thank you very much.
No, I can't. My pleasure. What can I say? Lovely to see everybody from Israel, and we wish Mazel Tov again. Let's look forward to good things next week. The simplest can begin.
And fast well.
Fast well, everybody. Take care.